Welcome to the Derek Loudermilk Show. This is episode 327 with Jason Diggs, all about authentic relating. All right, today we are joined by Jason Diggs. He's one of the leaders of the authentic relating movement, and he's the author of the recent book, Conflict Equals Energy. And I just want to start off by saying I had a pretty big impact from doing the show with Jason. I'm recording this intro about a month after we did the actual interview, and I've used what we talked about in this interview and what I learned from the book pretty much every day since then, with my family, with my kids, with my clients, and really just thinking about how I am in relationship with other people, within conversation, and sort of what is the larger context of our relationship. And it's really brought that to the forefront of my awareness. And it's been so magical and special to have that. And so this is a really powerful interview for me, and I think it will be for you. So authentic relating is, he calls it a decentralized open source movement, but it's emotional intelligence, emotional education, and how we are in relationship with each other. So in this episode, we're going to talk about responsibility. We're going to talk about conflict, judgment, noticing what's going on for us in the moment, presence, different levels of listening. And in Jason's book, he talks about all these different games we can play. And he calls them games because there's really no set rules for how to be. And it's just ways that we can practice these skills of being with each other. And one of the most important things that we need right now is to be able to relate to each other on a personal level, for our own mental health, on a global and national level, so that we're not demonizing people that are different from us, and really getting curious and digging into the differences that we have. So for me, this feels like such a timely episode, both for what we can do within our friendships and our families, but also nationally and internationally and politically and all of these things. The real courage it will take is to have conversations and get curious with people and sit through discomfort and process through all the different emotions that come up for us when we're dealing with so many things that are changing in our lives. And authentic relating and Jason and his book provide the tools and the sort of fun, playful, right? The gameful way of practicing these skills, because it is a skill. Emotional intelligence is a skill, communication is a skill, and you can get really good at it, and it's accessible to everyone. So I encourage you to listen to this interview with an eye towards possibility. How can you apply this in your own life for a better experience in your relationships, a better experience for humanity? So without further ado, here is Jason Diggs. Jason Diggs, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Derek.
And you wrote this book, Conflict Equals Energy, and you're one of the leaders in the authentic relating movement. And I'm just curious how you got into this. How did you get started in this?
Well, the origin story is I worked for Ken Wilber. So I moved to Boulder like 18 years ago, and Ken Wilber is this crazy philosopher, transpersonal psychologist who's written, 30 books on East-West psychology, and he's friends with David Beta and Deepak Chopra. And I moved here, and I was his videographer, and so I got to film him corresponding and talking with all of these spiritual teachers, and created so much content for his organization around integral psychology, integral Buddhism, integral Christianity. And that's how I got my start. Like I just learned at the feet of the masters by pinning microphones on some spiritual teachers and leaders and teachers. And so I was an independent video producer here in Boulder. And years later, and I encountered authentic relating, and that was about 8 years ago at the Integral Center. And there was this palpable feeling like, oh, there's something here. There's something for me. There's something like my path is here. That's what it felt like. And it was really interesting because I had been doing transpersonal psychology and personal growth work and meditation, and all of those things kind of helped me get a feel for who am I? Like more self-awareness, more understanding of the human condition, but it didn't touch certain parts of my personality that were just stuck. You know what I'm saying? And when I encountered authentic relating, however, there was like palpable shift in movement in some of those challenging places in my life that were causing me a lot of pain, really.
And did it feel like you instantly were like, okay, I'm going to commit to having a career in this field?
Not exactly. Like I was just very interested in.
What was it like when you first encountered? Did you commit to a career in authentic relating right away?
No, not exactly. It was more like my community. I'd found my tribe, and I was growing like crazy in the beginning, and then I just had this idea that like, oh, I want to lead groups. And it was the first time I'd ever had that idea in my life. You know, I was about 37 at the time. And over the next 3 years, I slowly changed my career. I was still making money through being a video producer, but I was teaching and developing content and, you know, developing these 2 and 3 hour workshops. And one of the things that it did for me in the beginning that was really palpable was I had painful social anxiety. Like a lot of people, a lot of people don't talk about it, but they'll feel and experience that. And it wasn't all the time. It was more like 30% of the time I would be in a social situation and there would be some configuration of people, or there'd be too many people, and I would feel really self-conscious and really withdrawn into myself, and like I couldn't really connect. And you know, the palpable emotional pain feeling of anxiety
Sure.
was there in the background, and that was affecting my ability to enjoy myself. And when I encountered authentic relating in a few months of practice, that basically went away completely. And now it's like a very, very rare experience. And so I couldn't even speak to more than like 4 or 5 people at a time without quaking in my boots. And then, you know, 6 months later, I'm leading events with like 20, 30 people in them. And yeah. So it was a fast growth. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, you know, I see that there was a possibility for you. There was a lot of growth for you. I'd love if you could talk about a little bit of, you know, what is possible for just your average person through authentic relating, and what's possible for society, for humanity.
I love this question. And yeah, I think humanity needs emotional education, and we need education about how to connect with one another, and especially how to handle conflict and tension in our relationships. Like that's really why I wrote the book, and why the title is Conflict Equals Energy. And for the individual, it really starts with direct training on how to increase their emotional intelligence. We've known for 25 years, you know, since Daniel Goleman, I think it was 26 or 27 years ago, that he wrote this book called Emotional Intelligence. And we've known that it's really important for humans' success. It's more important than just intelligence. But we haven't necessarily known how to train it. Like, we know good parenting helps, right? But we still don't have education in our middle schools and high schools about emotions and relationships and boundaries, and you know, how to be someone in the world who's assertive without turning people off or negatively impacting people, right? So we have to kind of do this education remedially in a way for adults that's like, because it's so needed, right? So for an individual who wants to have a better social life, it wants to create community, wants to get promoted at work, and they find that there's these stubborn blocks that have been tripping them up for years. Authentic relating can provide a lot of exercises and practices that help us unwind those things and allow us to be, on average, much more emotionally intelligent. And what does that mean? It just means that we are in touch and in tune with our bodies and our emotions, and we can actually interpret the signals of them.
Yeah. Sometimes I will do check-ins with the masterminds that I run, and I'll say, a lot of times we'll just do like a brag of something success we've experienced in our business. But sometimes we'll do like a check-in, like what's your state? How are you feeling? What are your emotions? And some people will say like, well, I'm thinking about this one strategy right now in my business. And that's not really anything to do with how they're physically feeling or their emotions. And I myself have, through painstaking trying to learn this stuff, can now identify like where a feeling is in my body and perhaps name the feeling, but sometimes not. And it's like learning a language to some degree of your own internal experience.
Yeah, the way I think of it is that our emotions speak a different language. They don't speak English. And so authentic relating gives us like a translator that allows us to talk to our hearts and talk to our emotional bodies and talk to our impulses and our desires, which I kind of think live in the belly. Our intuition and our desire are kind of connected as well. And they just don't speak the same language as our mind. And so we need to strengthen that pathway between all three and get them talking to each other.
Yeah. And from what I understand, there's a lot of neurons in the gut. There's a lot of additional information there that if we're just using the sort of rational sequential mind, we're missing out on a lot of benefit that's non-translatable. So, that sort of listening to your gut, listening to your intuition is valuable information in terms of if you're an entrepreneur or if you're making some sort of decision, you want all the information you can get.
Yeah, exactly. And getting information from each other in community is what authentic relating is about. It creates these feedback loops. Just like you said, with the check-ins that you do in your mastermind, a lot of times when you ask an emotional question of like, hey, how you feeling? People will say, I've been thinking this lately, or this is what's been going on in my life. And that pathway to their emotional self is just not that strong. It just hasn't been exercised that often. So the exercises allow us to strengthen that, but it's in community and getting feedback from one another that we actually say, you know what, I am stuck in my head a lot of the time, right? Oh, I am reticent to go into that emotional space with you. Why am I reticent to do that, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I want to talk about something that's hit close to home for me recently. And I live in a city where the homicide rate is going up, the violent crime rate is going up, St. Louis. And it's just like the very next neighborhood over. So this neighborhood is pretty okay. But just like a few blocks away, it's crazy. And I read this article, this man ended up killing his family. And it seemed like it was largely because he was angry and like didn't have an outlet. My story was that he just like couldn't express it. He didn't know his emotions. So he was just so angry and frustrated that he had to kill somebody, and it was his family. And it was just this, just like unbelievable, like couldn't something have been done? And right away I thought of, because I was in the middle of reading your book, I thought like, if he only had some skills, then it seems like this could have been avoided. And there's so many factors of the socioeconomics of the situation that, maybe he was, I don't know his mental state, any of this stuff, but that was what came up for me. I said, gosh, these skills could prevent a lot of the terrible things that are happening around us. What are your thoughts on that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really my life mission to make these tools and skills as accessible as possible. That's why I wrote the book. I was trained through these leadership workshops that are quite expensive in some ways, and cost prohibitive for many, many segments of the population. And then I co-founded this company for years, and we went all over the world doing this $300 workshop where you got to learn all of the basic skills of authentic relating for $300. And we put thousands of people through this course. And when I sat down to write the book, it was like this feeling of like, okay, we've put 2,000 people through this course, and the way that humanity is going, how can I do this faster? And so I put everything I had learned in 7 years about this practice into the book. And, my personal story is in the preface and it's in the conclusion, and but mostly it's a manual and a really kind of dense curriculum with lots of tools. There's 30 tools. There's 12 games and exercises and different things. And it's just so needed. And like you're saying, it's people out there are struggling. And I think COVID-19 and the impacts on especially America, because that's what I know, but perhaps other parts of the world as well, is the greatest loss of mental emotional health we've seen since World War II. It's just like people don't have access to community. People don't have access to like chatting at the water cooler with their, colleagues, and emotions build up, and people don't know how to express them. And what is mental illness? There's some types of severe mental illness, but normal dysregulation happens in the nervous system for all of us the same way, and we have to discharge it some way. And some of us learn to discharge it through exercising or calling a friend and venting or whatever other healthy coping mechanisms we have. And likely the man that you're talking about in this neighborhood in St. Louis, he just didn't have any coping mechanisms to work with his anger, right? And so can I say one more thing about it?
Yeah.
So psychology came up with an answer, right? It's called talk therapy. And it's been around for 150 years. It's actually quite amazing what it can do if someone commits to talk therapy and develops a relationship with their therapist. And, there's plenty of modalities that work amazingly. But if you think about it, if every human being needed 1 hour a week of therapy to stay mentally, emotionally regulated, that means 1 in 40 people would have to be therapists on the planet.
Yeah.
That wouldn't work. So authentic relating is kind of like sustainable mental health, like teaching people to create community, teaching people to get their emotional needs met, teaching people to ask for what they need. Yeah.
I know we've had a past guest, our mutual connection, David Wood, on the show, and he was going into prisons and teaching this stuff to inmates. And I didn't actually appreciate what that might do at the time. I was like, oh, I'm glad you're doing it, but I didn't really get it. And now that seems like, oh man, this is a perfect application for this. But just a citizen who's not in the prison system, like this guy that we're talking about, he may or may not encounter the book. And, here we are, two white guys. Have you seen this spread to sort of other communities other than sort of the privileged white Americans that I know a lot of?
Yeah. And that's happening, really year by year. So the authentic relating movement has been around for about 15 years. And the first 10 years, it grew very slowly. And it was mostly it was workshop culture. It was personal growth junkies, people who had already studied meditation and had already done personal growth work, they would come to these courses and be like, wow, this relational practice, waking up together, relationship as a path of growth, is amazing. And people would have these great experiences, and they would leave the workshops, and some people would even start communities in other parts of the world. And me and my old co-founder, Raul Castano, we looked at this problem and said, what, how do we take this outside of personal growth culture? How do we make something that has a chance of going into the mainstream? And so that's what I've done in the book. I've translated everything into really plain language. I've taken out as much of the jargon as possible. And it's happening. Authentic relating is a decentralized open source movement that's being led by 100 people. I just happen to be one of the 10 teachers that has kind of name recognition, and I feel honored to be, the first person to write a book on the topic. But we're training facilitators at an enormous rate. Like I'm doing a course this month where we're training 30 addiction treatment counselors in authentic relating. So we're mixing authentic relating style facilitation and all of the authentic relating exercises with addiction counseling. I'm doing another training 15 leaders in facilitation. That's what I'm up to right now. And the number of people that are getting equipped to lead this work in the world is just increasing and has been increasing for 5 years straight. So it's the ripple effect. That's the way I see it.
When you say decentralized, it reminds me a lot of other decentralized, blockchain and digital currencies and stuff like that. So it seems to fit right in with the trend of the times, I suppose. Mm-hmm. What does it take to, what is the certification or the training like? How long does it take to become certified to train this?
It depends on which organization you talk about. My original training was 6 months, 1 weekend a month, 1 3-day course per month for 6 months. And it was a $6,000 course. Me and my old co-founder, had a 7-day leadership course that was residential. The current trainings that I'm doing with AuthRev, it's a 4-month training. And so we meet once a week on Zoom for 4 months, but there's 100 hours of video content that we've created. That's called the Foundations of Facilitation through AuthRev. And so there's maybe 5 major organizations that are training leaders out there in different aspects of this practice. Yeah.
And because you've facilitated so many workshops, mm-hmm. What did you learn from the facilitation side about how to teach this?
Well, part of the modality, it takes something that in coaching and therapy is a strength. So as a coach, there's a power dynamic that's very healthy and good. Like the person is paying you and you're assuming a place of authority, and your job is to bring out their wisdom and to also offer advice and offer your wisdom and create an outcome for the person, right? In therapy, there's all these laws that govern therapy, like all these protections to make sure you don't ever sleep with your students and all this stuff, or otherwise you could lose your license. And there's a very clear role that you take that is designed to be therapeutic, right? Well, authentic relating just goes the opposite direction and says, in order to lead this work, you have to be in the work. You have to be transparent in your leadership. That's the word that we use. So I am me. I'm Jason with all of my strengths and weaknesses. I am required as an authentic relating leader to practice to practice vulnerability. So, Brené Brown has paved the way for this work in so many ways, like starting, I don't know what it was, like maybe 6-7 years ago, like her TED Talks became really popular, and she's written 4 or 5 books on it, and so the topic of vulnerability is in the zeitgeist, right? So what we're doing is we're combining that with leadership. You have to be revealing yourself and revealing your experience with the people that you're teaching and facilitating. That's the modality. If you're not doing that, you're actually not in authentic relating, or not authentic leadership. What would we call that? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And one thing that I really loved about the book was that, like you said, it's full of these exercises, these games, which I really appreciate, because I'm always thinking, how can we train this? How can we get people to actually have the experience of doing it? And there's a difference between, okay, I'm going to read this book. It sounds like it could be great. And then you maybe run up against the wall of discomfort. Like, do I actually want to try this? And so the games, with a gameful mindset, you're willing to just take risks, and it's like within the context of a game. So I really appreciate that. It was, for folks listening, it was, for me, it was a pretty quick read, just to sort of understand, to be able to do this interview. But I think it's something that you can take with you as a workbook. We've had people, either emotional intelligence trainers. I don't know if they're calling themselves authentic relating trainers, but I brought them in on my adventure retreats. So we'll do a day where we're surfing or we're canyoning, and then the next day is authentic relating. And for some people, it's harder to jump off a cliff, but for some people, it's harder to do an authentic relating exercise. Mm-hmm. And so that's leading me to let's talk about the discomfort of being open and sort of authentic. And you talk a lot about the concept of safety. So I'm just going to leave that as a place for you to jump off.
Yeah, we have different parts of us that are, developed, and parts of us that are underdeveloped. And like you said, for someone, it might be really scary to do something like go out into the ocean with bigger waves than they've ever been on before, and for another person that might be thrilling and exciting. But get someone into a room and ask them to talk about their emotions, or ask them to have a conversation with someone that involves a lot of eye contact and a lot of like revealing themselves, like who they are and what they really care about. And they'll be quickly at their edge, right? So this is really about learning and development. It's about flow state. What is flow state? We're challenged in a way that feels manageable or tolerable. We're challenged and we're supported. And that's why this work is often done in groups. Because if you're in a group of 20 people and you're asked to do something in the emotional realm that is so foreign to you, like maybe you've only opened up this way to, your college buddies after a night of drinking, or maybe you've only opened up this way to someone you've known for 5 or 10 years. You've never done it with a so-called stranger, right? Well, you're asked to go into that emotional realm, and having a group of people who are also doing that is supportive. And what we see is just people who do this, who push themselves, they grow like crazy. They're able to ask for what they want in life. They're able to negotiate better with their friends to get their needs met. Instead of getting annoyed with your friends when they're doing something you don't like and sweeping it underneath the rug, and then you do that 10 times in a row and you're not friends anymore, you're just acquaintances, right? Like that happens to all of us at some point in our lives. And so it really is going into a territory together that is so rich, it's really an infinite mystery. Like, who are we? Who are we in connection, right? Who are we in a group? Who are we in relationship to one other person? We could inquire into that and explore that for a long time and just scratch the surface.
I'm thinking to I suppose it was an authentic relating circle in Boulder. I was visiting a couple of years ago, and I don't know if it's like a secret group. I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about it, but it was like we went to someone's house, and there was a group of 20 or 30 folks. I had to have an invite from multiple people or something like that, and it was. I was very timid at first because people were just, sort of sharing their experience. And I was like, I'm not going to share just yet. Just going to wait to see how it goes. And then I was, testing the waters, trying to well, if I'm here, I might as well share something. I might as well try to do something. But there was no real protocol, so to speak. It was just like everyone seemed to know the authentic relating rules. But it was very, I felt like a beginner. Like, can I share that I'm just don't even know what I'm doing right now? And I did, and I was like, oh gosh, got that out of the way, whew. So there's some intimidation level. And actually, I was a little intimidated for this interview because I thought like Jason is so experienced at this that maybe I will come across as like a doofus, and you're going to come across as really well spoken and like so anyway, in both of these instances I had this sort of, man, I'm just not very skilled at this authentic relating idea, this concept.
I don't think any of us are, in the sense that like, who's the most emotionally intelligent leader you could ever imagine? Like Thich Nhat Hanh, like Bishop Desmond Tutu, like, Nelson Mandela was imprisoned for 20 some years, and he befriended the guards and to the point where they were like literally in love with him by the time he was released from prison. And then went on to create forgiveness and healing in South Africa, right? Victor Frankl, was in the Nazi concentration camps and ended up writing one of the most seminal books ever, Man's Search for Meaning, as a result of being like, these are superhuman levels of compassion and wisdom, right? And so my encouragement to all of us is just to let's get to the business of actually developing our empathy. Like, develop your biceps, great. Develop your balance, great. But we need to work on our empathy. We need to work on our perspective taking in an active way as humanity. And we're all starting from the place we are. It's like my particular upbringing allowed me to have a certain set of capacities. But there's other ones I'm extremely underdeveloped in that I can learn from you in. And that's the new paradigm of leadership. Like, we're all just walking each other home, I think is what Ram Dass said.
I like that.
Yeah.
So while we're on the topic of these amazing people, there's part of the book where you reference Martin Luther King Jr. and being a visionary. And a lot of my clients are visionaries or want to be more of a visionary. And I think there's a lot of space right now for people to step up and lead and be visionaries and sort of say, here's what we actually want. I think there's a lot of here's what we don't want, but not as much here's what the future could be. And so, I see this as potentially a valuable for visionaries. Could you speak about that a little bit?
Yeah, we talk about leadership in terms of setting context. So setting context is setting the stage and the parameters and all of the limitations and possibilities for a group of people. And it's a very complex tool and art form. That's why I have a whole chapter on it in the book. And the most advanced type of leadership is what I would call visionary leadership. And that's the section of the book that you're talking about. And yeah, painting a picture with words of a world that is possible if humans develop themselves in a certain way. It kind of just pushes evolution, just like 1% along the way for the whole collective, right? So really what I recommend for leaders is get good at setting context and practice that in very small ways. Like when the context of your romantic partnership is off kilter or has some friction in it, get good at naming what's happening without judging your partner and without creating friction, and offering a new context that the two of you could step into, right? And these are kind of the basic building blocks. Like when you start doing this for small groups of people or in your relationships, you can just develop your leadership capacity.
What would be a good example of setting context?
So, Derek, I would love to have a relationship with you where we stay in touch and we get to like send each other, articles we're interested in and topics, and we get to maybe mostly over audio message. Like I use WhatsApp audio or Voxer audio messages. Like I'd love to stay in touch with you that way, and just stay connected to you. And maybe we could even be friends and develop a colleague relationship. I enjoy you. How does that sound for you?
That's intriguing. I think I would like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And what else, what other things would you like? What other parameters would you lay down for that?
I haven't really thought about it. I like, one thing I really like to do is connect people and figure out ways for mutually beneficial relationships. And you seem like someone who is trying to do some interesting things. And so, I like to, besides recording shows and getting your message out, I like to figure out other ways to help. So that's the first thing that comes to mind is, being useful in some way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we could look out for each other and just recommend that we connect with certain people that might help us on our missions in life. And yeah, that sounds cool. So I'm setting context with you for a type of relationship that I would like to have with you in the future.
So when you say context, I mean, so you just said, okay, here's a thing that I want, and we're going to set context for that. Okay, how about another example? The one where you said about the relationship when something's not going right. What would that be like?
Mm-hmm. So in a romantic context, if there's friction every time there's a planning conversation, like for instance, this was happening with me and my partner recently, like when we had, when we were trying to plan a trip or trying to figure out schedule, there just tended to be a little bit of a breakdown. And so I might say to her, hey, I'm noticing this thing happening. Do you agree that we could upgrade how we're having these types of conversations? And then if she says yes, I would say, whenever that's happening, let's set aside more time for it. Let's make sure that we have a minimum of 20 minutes to talk about it. And instead of just talking about the plans, let's talk about our desires and our values first. Like what we would like to experience, what we would like to feel. And then we can make decisions together based on those values and desires. How does that sound, honey?
Gotcha. Okay, cool. And so something I'm just realizing here is that this takes, you mentioned setting aside more time for this. It seems like that's one thing that this requires, is that you let go of moving quickly from one thing to the next. You let go of needing to like be productive and tick off boxes, but you just like give it the time it takes, which is another sort of hurdle for some people, including myself at times.
Mm-hmm. The pace of relationship is slow, right? The pace of our minds and our careers and our technology and our society is fast. And there's nothing wrong with fast, believe me. Like, I'm a musician, jazz is very fast. It's very beautiful too, right? But if we don't have the ability to downshift, we're going to have negative impact on our relationships.
Yeah. So we just have to accept that. And so what do you say to somebody who is, trying to, like, I have little kids, I'm trying to be as productive as I can. I also, value my health and work out and stuff. So I've got this theoretically quite packed schedule. What do you recommend for someone like me?
I mean, the first step is, it's already something you're doing. It's putting it on the map as something that you want to develop alongside the other important areas of your life. It's like, I want to have, epic relationships with people where, we're 90 years old and talking about the good old days and talking about our grandkids, I want to have a rich community where I know that if something's up for me, I always have someone to call. I always have someone to turn to. I want to develop an emotional support system for myself. I want to be able to resource myself so I could give back more to my family. These kinds of emotional goals, just to put them on the map is the first step.
I'm reminded of a statistic that something like 25-year-old men have like 0.2 close friends or something. And it was like, 35 people 35 and older had like 1 to 3 friends or something, close friends that they could call in a time of need. And I was just, I read that a few years ago and I was just blown away. But I think, I have friends that their life consists of, their work and video games, or their dogs and work, and people that I knew in high school or things like that, and they don't have a community. And I, personally, I just happen to have a few things that I do that have a community as part of them. Sports is the most obvious one. But yeah, that's definitely I think something that a lot of people would really welcome, having more just close friendships.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in the introduction to my book, I cite the Harvard study, which you might be familiar with. They tracked thousands of men over the course of 80 years. And they studied their lives. And they were studying life fulfillment. So when you get to the end of your life, do you have a lot of regrets or few regrets? What's your emotional and physical health like toward the end of your life? And the major finding of this is that people who had close friendships that were in their lives for decades were far more fulfilled and far more healthy. There was very little correlation with wealth. There was very little correlation for socioeconomic circumstances of childhood. And there was lots of correlation to people who just had someone that they could always call, and someone who is witnessing their life over year after year. And, I had this moment when I was in my mid-20s, and I was super lonely. isolated, just unsatisfied with life. And I dealt with it by moving to Boulder and the community in my late 20s. But I used to say this thing, it's really hard to find friends after college. And I think a lot of us just naturally found ourselves finding friend groups in high school and college. You know, some people don't have that even. They feel really isolated or like an outcast almost. But even the outcasts have their own group.
Right? And their own band.
Yes. But there's something about that phase of life from age 15 to, 22, 23, whenever you leave college, where there's all of these structures that allow you to meet lots of people.
Sure.
And then among those lots of people, you ended up gravitating and picking towards people who you resonate with. And maybe you're all musicians, or maybe you're all, outdoors type people, or whatever it is, and we just don't have that as adults. And so they're actually, after age 25, we probably need deliberate time invested in who are my close people, how do I cultivate those connections, like separate from dating, separate from finding a mate. We probably need to have a goal of like, how do I get out there and meet people and meet my tribe? Because that's just how we're wired. That's how we thrive.
Yeah. Start a podcast. That's what I did.
That's what you did?
Let's see, where do I want to go with this? Let's talk about in relationship, when you get into a conflict, because your title of your book is Conflict Equals Energy. Mm-hmm. And, I've had the experience, probably most people have had the experience of like, just an angry fight, where it's like, we get, what's going on here. Like, you're wrong. No, you're wrong. All these, like all these things. What's possible, for navigating conflict like that once you have these skills?
Mm-hmm. The reason I titled the book Conflict Equals Energy is because it's a bit of a koan. Koan is just like a Japanese word that means puzzle. Our nervous system, when we are in conflict, usually means like there's something at stake for us that's really, really important, that's causing a lot of fear. That could be social status, that could be money, that could be respect. Like if I fear that I'm going to lose the respect of a certain person at work, right? Then all of a sudden my livelihood is at stake, at least according to my subconscious animal. My conscious mind might not be even aware of that, or probably isn't aware of that. But what happens is the brain or the nervous system in general sends signals to us that's like danger, danger, and we experience something we call emotional pain, or anxiety, fear, the type of anger that's not clean. It feels pain, like emotionally painful to be angry at someone you love, if you're familiar with that feeling. And we therefore avoid conflict. I think we're all naturally conflict avoidant. Even people who are very dominant, and there are just, somewhere between 5 and 10% of the population is just very dominant in a way that most people aren't. Even those people, they're trying to end the conflict as quick as possible so that they can get back to not feeling the thing that they're feeling.
Yeah.
So in a way, it's painful for all of us. And the thesis of the book is like, how do we actually reform our relationship to that energy and turn towards conflict, saying, instead of our nervous system screaming signals, this should not be happening, solve it, like use whatever mechanisms you can to get out of this, or appease the person or dominate the person or whatever your strategy is, to a 180. So conflict equals energy is about a 180, which is, there's something to learn here. There's something that this person has for me. And if I can treat this person like a teacher, even if they're a difficult person for me, if I can treat the situation like, oh, I have something to learn here, that is what slows down the nervous system enough to bring a little bit of spaciousness, and allow us to be, 10, 20, 30% more skillful in that situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I from my experience, when, maybe one person is triggered and you're like, okay, I still have my faculties. Like I can still be reasonable sometimes. And they say something and you're like, what? That's not even, and then both people are sort of in this heightened state and you lose the ability to like be curious or to even care. And so it seems like one of the first skills is like, how do you, if they're not going to do it, you need to get to a place where you can like be calm enough to be curious. Mm-hmm. Any steps to getting to that place?
Well, yeah, curiosity and judgment cannot exist in the same person at the same time. So curiosity in many ways is the antidote. The very first tool in the book, so the book is 12 chapters, but there's actually 30 tools. And the tools are, they're all about 200 to 400 words long, and you can read them very quickly. They're things you can directly apply to your life. The very first tool in the first chapter is called Can We Slow Down? And these are words that you can actually say out loud to anyone when you're in a challenging situation. Like I said before, keeping the long-term value of the relationship in mind, even when there's difference.
That's the context?
Yes. Because when we're triggered, what does this word mean? It just means our nervous system is activated in a way where we become less skillful in our communication, and we become less in touch with the long-term values we have. Like less in touch with compassion, less in touch with the ability to take another person's perspective, less in touch with even who this person is to us and what all the good things that they've done for us in the past, So those things go out the window when we're highly triggered. And so authentic relating, it's literally dozens of teachings and exercises and practices that all add up to these, to being skillful in conflict, which really is communication mastery. When we feel threatened, to know, to slow down, and to learn to own our experience instead of blaming the other, and all of these things. It's a tall order. And that's why in the book I kind of detail it out in really bite-sized pieces. And the last 2 chapters are about conflict transformation, chapter 11 and 12. And it's kind of like, I think of the Karate Kid. It's like, wax on, wax off, paint the fence up and down, sand the deck, all that stuff. And then when you put it all together, it ends up being an art form. Yeah.
Can we talk a little bit more about some of those steps? Like after you slow down and create a little bit more control over yourself, then what?
Mm-hmm. So there's a process in chapter 11 that's called emotional Aikido. Mm-hmm. And it really has to do with receiving the other person. And that's a 5-step process. So it's a little detailed. I won't go so much into it, but then there's another process called emotional alchemy. That's what to do if you have a judgment, if you have a charge. And that's also a 5-step process. So I think of them as 2 different skill sets. But
one facing the other person and one facing yourself.
yeah, one for receiving someone else's emotional energy, and one for if you're the person with the emotional charge. But really, I'll talk about own your experience, which is were you familiar with this before you read the book, or?
Not necessarily.
Yeah. So nonviolent communication was developed by this guy named Marshall Rosenberg.
Right. Yeah. I did make this connection that there's some relation there.
Yeah. And it started, I think, in the late 70s or early 80s. And it was very popular, went all over the world. There's classes all over in Europe and other places. And Marshall Rosenberg was a genius. He was amazing. The problem with nonviolent communication is it's not describing what to do. It's describing what not to do.
Okay.
Don't be violent with your speech. That's a really good starting place. And violent with your speech essentially means anytime you're taking an internal narrative or a story and claiming it as true for the other person.
And is that like you made me mad kind of thing?
Yeah, that's the traditional example, but I think often it's very much more nuanced than that. It's like things are unfair. Like things are unfair in this, or things are unbalanced in this relationship. Like that's a truth claim or a statement that the other person will feel as subtly violent toward them.
Mm-hmm. And it doesn't really mean anything either.
Yeah, it's just a random belief that you have about how things are going, right? Or like, I'm giving so much, or and so the solution to this is owning your experience, which is often thought of as like talking in I statements or speaking in ways that are inarguable, which is the teachings of nonviolent communication. Really, really important first step to practice owning your experience. But owning your experience also means owning your energetic impact on other people. So it's not just the way you speak, it's really taking responsibility for. One of my teachers a long time ago used to have this phrase called 200% responsibility, which is, I take responsibility for everything I'm putting into the world and everything I'm communicating. Mm-hmm. And I take responsibility for co-creating any dynamic I'm in with any other person. So if they're being subtly violent with me, violent's a funny word. If they're not owning their experience by making truth claims about me and my motivations, or making truth claims about the world or the state of things, what I do in 200% responsibility is I don't react to that. Like, it's not very helpful to say, will you own more of your experience? You actually just clean that language up inside of yourself and respond to the needs and the values underneath. So, yeah.
And this is leading me to a train of thought that I've been having a lot lately, which is how we co-create reality. And it's sort of like, applied consciousness. Like, let's say we're all sort of co-creating this reality together with our intent, our consciousness, all of these things. Then it becomes very important, this 200% responsibility, for co-creating the reality between you and someone else.
Yeah. Yeah, and the power of the unconscious and the subconscious mind means that we're co-creating reality with others unconsciously, unknowingly, in a lot of ways.
So I think there's I'm not there's a thread there in terms of once we've slowed down and once we're practicing speaking sort of inarguably and owning our experience, what else do we need to know here?
You know, I say this thing in the beginning of the chapter on listening, which is listening can actually heal any conflict. And listening is about linking our nervous systems together. So there's a way in which, like, through eye contact, through reflective listening, through listening to the values and the motivations and the underneath, and listening to the heart of the person and not just the content, there's a way that we can start to have, like, I call it Jedi listening, but we can start to have these like communication superpowers. And you know, it's like I've been practicing this for years. It's not like it's online all the time. You know, even after, you know, years of practice, I have to turn it on. I have to stop my normal egoic mode of trying to get things done and my own motivations and ambitions. I have to just put that on pause, like put it on the shelf for a moment, and go into the mode where I'm actually listening. It's like a heart-to-heart connection. It's more eye contact. It's even breathing together. And so I guess what I want to do is just put on the map for people that listening can be magical, and it can be something that you grow in for your entire life. Like, it's an entire skill set. There's always more emotional and psychic information happening than you could ever tune into.
Yeah, that's it reminds me of an exercise that one of these trainers did in one of my adventure trips. They had someone like try as hard as they could to ignore the other person, and like you're just supposed to tell them about something that you're really excited about, and they try as hard as possible to like be involved in something else. And how does it feel? And then the opposite, like what is it like when they're just like on the edge of their seat, like trying to get you to share about this thing that you love, and the difference of how it feels to be listened to with that fully active listening versus the, you know, barely aware listening. It was a stark, you know, powerful exercise. And it also reminds me of, there's this, I believe it's Chris Voss, the Negotiate as If Your Life Depends on It. And he talks about the importance of listening in, you know, hostage negotiations. And I think he says, if you're listening properly and you say back to them, you want them to be saying, that's right. You want them to be saying like, yes, you got it exactly. Versus not like, oh, you're right, but that's right. You've heard me clearly.
Yeah, there's like this double confirmation thing that we often skip over because we're going quite fast. One of my favorite quotes is from this guy named George Bernard Shaw, and it goes, "The biggest problem with communication is the illusion that it's happened." In other words, we think that because we said something to someone, they actually, that the communication happening.
Right.
But it's not communication until there's like that double confirmation of like, do you hear me, Bravo? Gotcha, Echo.
Yeah, and then you get into these like alternate realities, like we had this conversation and you agreed, like, well, we never talked about that. And you're like, I swear it happened. You know?
Yeah, because so often, like when we're telling someone our desire, it's like new information for them, and they might need a couple of days or a couple of weeks to know whether or not it's right for them or feel into it. But for us, it occurs as an agreement because they're nodding and listening to us, right? Like two different worlds happening.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. There's one tool I'll just mention because it relates to this. And it's one of the early tools in the book. It's called Let Me Check. And this is basically like really skillful use of stalling. Instead of saying yes to something that you feel socially obligated to, it's simply to always just say, not maybe, because that's can be emotionally confusing or frustrating to the other person, to always say, let me check. Let me check in with myself and I'll get back to you. You know?
That's like the excuse that I have. Let me check with my wife to make sure that it's okay for me to do that. But it's like, let me check with my own self.
Yeah. Let me check with my wife. In other words, let me get some time for me to talk to someone so that I can actually come to emotional clarity for myself and then come back to you.
Yeah. And some people can know right away whether it's a yes or no. And some people need this time. And they're, as I've learned a little bit about human design, and some people, like, they go from a yes to a no to a yes to a no, and they're like oscillating until they get to whether it really is a yes or a no.
Mm-hmm.
I want to bring up something that happens, I think, in a lot of relationships, and it's maybe sort of a man-woman dynamic. I'm thinking about in Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. There's this whole the woman wants to say something and it sounds like complaining, and the guy's like, well, let me just fix it for you and solve the problem. In authentic relating, what would you do if someone if it feels to one person like it's complaining and the other person, is obviously bringing it up for a reason?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is one of the more challenging ones for intergenerational things, because so many men my age and older, the only way that they knew how to help people was to give advice.
Mm-hmm.
So if someone was actually complaining about something or talking about emotional pain, their response was to jump in with advice. And if you do that, especially if you do that quickly, it almost always produces a emotional disconnect. So this is in the chapter on listening. Listening with the intent to give advice is actually quite a good way to help someone. Mm-hmm. Provided there's consent and provided there's actual listening happening first, which is like usually asking 2 or 3 questions before you jump in with the advice. So people just need basic training in listening and emotional and connection. It's, I'm convinced that we're going to be literally having these kinds of classes for 6th graders 10 years from now.
Well, I mean, the good news is that they're doing this with my 4-year-old at his preschool, right now. They're like,
really?
Here's, if you feel a big emotion, like, here's how to deal with it. So they're learning this stuff, which is fantastic. And it's starting off with like, here's 2 sock puppets interacting and, role playing it out. So that's great. And it means that they'll probably have more skill than I will. And I'll have to, up level my own skill through interviewing people like you, so I can keep up with my kids. There's this video. It's pretty old by now, but it's like it's not about the nail. You've seen this, the YouTube video. So there's a woman with a nail in her head, and she's just like, feeling all this stuff, this pressure, this pain, and he's like, okay, honey, that sounds really hard, and I think I have a solution. She's like, don't want you to solve my problem. It's everybody listen. It's ridiculous, but it's also like, it makes me roll my eyes because I've definitely felt like that guy at times. When I just know I can solve the problem. And so what you're saying is that if, first, before we try to solve it, we need to understand and then get permission. Like, do you want me to help you figure this out, or what would serve you right now, or what do you need right now?
Yes, this is a very important communication tool, which is just consent, because unsolicited advice or advice that's given too soon creates emotional disconnect. And advice that involves consent and involves listening, it's very connecting. It's called mentoring. It's like, I want advice from, smart people. Like, I want people in my life to help me. But I want to feel like they understand what's actually happening, which doesn't happen. That understanding doesn't take place if they jump in too soon. There's a common teaching that's like, listen to understand, not to respond, which I don't subscribe to. It's way too simplistic, because we kind of live in this day and age when the masculine and the mental is we're critical of the masculine and mental often. Mm-hmm. And the solution is balance, not being, in our hearts 100% of the time, right? It's not being more feminine. The solution is not being more feminine. And like our solution-oriented selves, that masculine energy, which occurs in both men and women, it's so sacred, right? Like, think of all of the ways that we are benefiting humanity by solving problems. Like, it's how we, like, our entire society is, developed through innovation and problem solving, right?
Yeah. I think I'd like to start to wrap with talking a little bit about courage. And we sort of touched on this earlier. Courage as a practice comes up a lot when I talk to adventurers, and, it's closely linked with building confidence in different domains. I'd love for you to talk about, the importance of courage in authentic relating.
No one's ever asked me this question before. Well, I think turning towards discomfort is absolutely necessary. So it relates back to what I was saying about conflict. Conflict is painful for all of us. And if we want to become if we want to become a powerful leader, especially, and we want to become a leader that is, I would say, in step with the times, a leader who's transparent and authentic, a leader who has empathy and listening online and can take information from people who are lower than them in the hierarchy, then we really, really need to get good at handling conflict or tension. Especially tension, because conflict, sometimes the solution is to not have this person in your life, to draw a boundary, right? But tension is like, if we can kind of bring up that small thing that gives us tension or creates, a little bit of a rub between you and I, and we can clear that one little thing, then we're back into clear connection with each other. And we need to do that actually likely many times to create true teamwork with someone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm just thinking now about actual teammates that I have, cycling teammates or Frisbee teammates, and how you can mess something up, and then you got to like communicate your way through it, and then you're back to sort of wanting to win together again.
So courage for me means that turning towards the conflict and tension rather than sweeping it underneath the rug when it's happening in a relational or a community place.
Yeah.
Because if we sweep it underneath the rug, what's going to happen is, a week from now when we're having, a beer with this colleague, or, or talking on the phone with this colleague, we're going to be talking shit about that other person because we just developed a small amount of resentment towards them and didn't clear it with them, right? And then that creates, gossip is what creates unhealthy community, right? If we're not going directly to the person and handling it with them, then it's going to come out sideways.
I hadn't heard that about gossip, but yeah, that makes sense. Where is there anything I haven't asked you that you think is important, or anything you want to touch on that we haven't yet?
I'm curious how this conversation is going for you, how you feel in this dialogue, and yeah, I feel.
Yeah, this is great. This is showing how it's done. Yeah, I feel pleased because we've touched on a lot of different angles. I'm also aware that I've got my notes here in front of me, and I'm trying to guide the conversation, but I'm trying to be a good listener because you're talking about listening, and I'm like, ooh, I got to be a good listener right now. So I'm just aware of managing this interview and being a listener, and also just learning from you and appreciating your expertise, because not often, well, I do get to interview so many great experts, but in this field, it's always, this is one of my areas where I'm still such a beginner, that I feel hopeful, like I can learn this stuff. This is great, and also just out of balance, and like I still am going to make a lot of mistakes. So yeah, a bunch of and those are thoughts. We were talking about this earlier. You're like, how are you feeling? And I just gave you a bunch of thoughts. But I feel relaxed in my person, in my physiology.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I noticed this sense of passion that's happening for me and inspiration. Like there's something about the way that you're asking questions where I feel a lot of permission to give the practical answer that I think would be good for the listener, but then kind of go to the deeper layer, the things that are really interesting to me on a philosophical level, and just from my observations about how humans work. And so I've just been enjoying that aspect of it. Yeah.
But yeah. Hearing that, I feel very happy to this is for the listener, but it's also for us, right? We're having this conversation before anybody gets to listen to it. So, we get to enjoy it first.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes I make a joke that it's like, this Zoom window and these microphones are just a time-space device so that we can talk to people in the future in their living rooms and offices.
Hello.
From the past.
Greetings, Earth humans. There's a Zoolander reference in there when they're what is he like? Earth to Mikas, and they're like, hello. He's who is that? Anyway, doesn't matter. Zoolander reference. Jason, well, let's point people to where they can find you, and let's start with that, and then I have one final question.
Yeah, so authrev.org, Authentic Revolution is my current company, and I am really out there in the world training leaders and facilitators, and very much available if people want to email me with ideas and projects. And I'm definitely working on some programs to bringing this into companies and businesses, if that's something that you're wanting to do. And I'm sure you'll include the link for the book, but Conflict Equals Energy, you can type that into Amazon, and it's literally the equals sign, the transformative practice of authentic relating. So thank you so much for this conversation.
Yeah, fantastic. And this question comes from one of my early favorite radio shows, Science Friday, and he would always ask the scientists, if I give you a blank check, what would you want to study or what would you want to do? And so let's modify that question of like, let's just say, you were fully financially supported and knew that you were going to succeed. Where would you want to point your attention? What would you want to do next?
Mm-hmm. Honestly, it would not be very different from what I'm exactly doing. My computer's beeping at me, so I'll just say that again in case you want to edit. What I'm doing right now is actually so in alignment with exactly what I would be doing if I was completely financially supported. I feel very supported by the universe. It would be training the leaders of tomorrow to really evolve this practice. One of the reasons I say authentic relating is an open source decentralized movement is because anyone can add to it. Anyone can take anything that I've put in the book and modify it and remix it and create your own workshops around it. And if you want to credit me as a source, go ahead, just bring it out there. I think the next phase of my work really has to do with bringing this into the business world. And so I think if I had like an abundance of financial resources, I would probably hire people to help me create a consultancy where we could really impact the corporate world with emotional education. And there's a way of like getting the corporate world to actually pay for community development. So this is actually starting to happen where a friend of mine, her project is called Seek Healing, and she's invited me on to be one of the course leaders because she has a company in British Columbia paying for a community development program, which means 75% of the participants of the authentic relating classes that she's doing are employees of this company, mm-hmm. and the other 25% are community members.
I like that.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Yeah, fantastic. That's my package. Let me pause this really quick. I got to go run and grab that.
Okay.
Yeah. So, Jason, thank you so much for coming on. It was really fantastic and great to spend more time with you, and looking forward to that friendship you mentioned in the show. Let's do it.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much, Derek. This has really been an alive, enjoyable conversation for me. And thank you for everything you bring into the world and spreading this wisdom. Yeah.
My pleasure. All right. Thanks.
Take care.
Bye.